All right, continuing on to 13.3 here, we're going to be looking at radian measures, continuing our little trig section that we have working on. So we're going to be looking at our trig radian measures. Okay, so this is another way of writing an angle. So we've dealt with degrees, okay, which is 360 is a full circle, and now we have another thing which is radians. Okay, so first off, in our unit circle, what's the radius length of our unit circle that was mentioned last video? The unit circle's length was 1 unit. Okay, so a unit circle has a length of 1 unit. So if the length is 1 unit, what's the distance of the circumference? So what's the distance around it? Distance around it would end up being 2 pi. So it ends up being 2 pi because, again, it's twice the radius times pi, or the diameter times pi. And what's the circumference of half a circle? Half a circle would end up being just pi. Okay, so that's for our unit circle, and those are some of the lengths that we have. Now, if we go back to our circle, a full circle is how many degrees? A full circle is 360 degrees. That's going to be the same as 2 pi. And what's a half circle? It's 180 degrees. That's going to be the same as pi. So what radians is doing is it's actually taking the measure of the angle that you have in your circle. So here's your circle. Here's your angle. So whatever it is, and the radians is measuring the length of the arc for it. So if I have something that's 30 degrees, or pi over 6 radians, the pi over 6 is the length of the arc in a unit circle. So in one unit circle, a 30-degree angle creates an arc of pi over 6 units, whatever the unit is that we're measuring in. So it's that length. A half a circle, or 180 degrees, is going to have a unit arc length of pi units. Okay, 3.14159, yada yada yada. Okay, full circle, the entire circle, or 360 degrees, is going to have 2 pi units. Okay, so that's why we use radians, is because it ties directly to the circle itself and the length of the arc of the circle. Okay, so again, radians is connecting the circumference to the angle measure, and these two formulas are ones you're going to want to have. You want to remember. They are the exact same formula, just solved for different variables. So if you have the radians and you want to find degrees, so if you're going from radians to degrees, you use that top formula. So radians times 180 divided by pi, and usually what happens is that the pi's will cancel out in this equation. Okay. If you're in degrees and you want to go into radians, you're going to use that bottom equation. Okay, so use the bottom equation for this. And usually what will happen is that you'll have pi in your answer for your radians. Now, the difference between degrees and radians is that degrees you're going to see the little degree sign. Radians will usually have pi, but sometimes it will not. Okay, radians will be more, it'll have a unit, or it'll just say a number. Okay, it won't have a little degree symbol. As you get into higher levels of math, radians becomes the go-to unit for angles. Okay, if you take pre-calc and physics, and not physics as much, higher level physics, you will, AP calculus, anything like that, you end up using radians over degrees for most things, because radians has a concrete answer. Degrees is just, well, it's 360 degrees, and then the question is, why is it 360? And that leads into a whole different discussion. So let's say I have pi over 2 radians. So if I have pi over 2 radians, what is the degrees? So using the previous two formulas, find the degree of pi over 2 radians. Pi over 2 radians would be 90 degrees. Okay. Now using the previous formula, find what the radians is for 225 degrees. That's right. So 5 pi over 4 ends up being our answer. And you want to keep these an exact answer. You don't want to round them in any way. 2 radians, what's the degree of 2 radians? So you notice this one doesn't have a pi in it. And so it ends up being approximately 114.59 degrees. When you're dealing with degrees, you usually will round it in some way. And sometimes you'll do what are called degrees, minutes, and seconds. And the last one, 150 degrees. What is that in radians? That is 5 pi over 6 radians. So 5 pi over 6 radians ends up being our problem. Okay. All right, that's it basically for the section. So going from degrees to radians, radians to degrees. Make sure you remember these formulas. Okay, so these are the main thing you should remember from this section.